Welcome to Back to the Bible. Today, pastor and Bible teacher Bryan Clark shares hope-filled words from 1 Peter about suffering for the cause of Christ and the blessing that brings. Later, Bryan will be joined by Back to the Bible CEO Arnie Cole and author Kara Whitney for an encouraging conversation about faithful living in today's world. Now here's today's message with Bryan Clark.
The winds of change are upon us, and it's naive to think that there won't be a day where Christians in America will be persecuted. Looking at little hints in the culture. So, for example, when there was that mass shooting in that church in Texas, a horrible event. One of the things that happened out of that is something that I don't remember happening before. There were people asking for prayer for the victims and the family members of victims in the shootings. And there were voices in the culture that mocked that. That these people were praying, they were worshiping when they were slaughtered. And there was this voice of mockery that obviously that doesn't work, it isn't true, and maybe rethink their options. Now, that's a high level of hostility to enter into that level of mockery to people who were praying and worshiping at the time of the slaughter. Yet what was interesting is there's been very little reaction to those voices in our culture. Things are changing. The possibility that those who are children today may suffer a level of persecution that we have never known before in our country for the cause of Christ is very real and very possible. And suddenly, the words of Peter start to make more sense to us. He says in verse 15, "Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or thief or evildoer or as a troublesome meddler." So there does seem to be some hint in Peter's letter that some of these believers are kind of drifting back to their pagan ways. He's addressed that several times already. But it's also possible that these people, as a result of the unfair, abusive treatment, have a tendency to justify bad behavior. That in our case, because what's going on, it's okay to steal and it's okay to do these things kind of justified because of the circumstance. What Peter is saying is not to do that. That the conflict, the judgment should not be because they're doing evil things, but rather for the cause of Christ. The interesting one is the idea of a troublesome meddler. Most scholars think Peter just basically made up this word. So there's a lot of discussion. What exactly does he mean? Some people like the translation agitator. Kind of carries the idea that earlier in Peter's letter, he really talked about learning to be skillful in a hostile culture. That we learn how to respond as citizens and as slaves and husbands and wives so as not to create unnecessary conflict. A troublesome meddler would be someone who kind of is crusading for the cause of Christ and just creating unnecessary conflict all over the place, making it worse for everyone. Now, we know these people. They are where we work. They're in our schools. They're on social media. They just think to stand for Christ is to somehow create all this unnecessary conflict, crusading for the things of God. But at the end of the day, all they're doing is making it much more difficult to have meaningful conversations with people that need to know Jesus. One of the things that's always helpful to remember is I don't expect unbelievers to act like believers. I don't expect unbelievers to share my values and beliefs. It is not productive to continually be pointing out everything that everyone is doing wrong and keeping things constantly in a state of conflict. Ultimately, we have to be more skillful than that and bring the conversation around to what it means to have an encounter with the resurrected Christ, to experience new life in Christ. That's the only thing that's going to generate real and lasting change. So basically, the troublesome meddler is someone who's just unnecessary, creating conflict, and everybody pays the price for that. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, now we'd probably read right past that, but it's worth noting there's only 3 times in the New Testament where the word Christian is ever used. Twice in the book of Acts and once here. It originally was kind of a derogatory term, a Christ follower, and who would be so naive and so stupid as to actually believe that? And they were called the Christians. So that's what Peter's talking about. It's kind of a slander. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in his name. We have a lot of this in the culture. Christians are considered to be simple-minded, somewhat naive, lacking in intellect, kind of easily persuadable, and Christians, generally speaking, are just kind of dumb. And the sophisticated among us see it differently. Paul says in Romans 1, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. What Peter is saying is, if they slander you, if they call you a name, wear it like a badge. Yes, it's true. I am a Christ follower. I do believe in the message of the gospel. It is the power of God unto salvation. Not to be ashamed or embarrassed by that, but to take our stand. But to glorify God in his name.
You're listening to Back to the Bible. If you'd like to listen again, visit backtothebible.org. Now let's return to Bryan Clark's message from 1 Peter chapter 4.
Verse 17, for it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? It's a very interesting couple of verses. In essence, we look around the world and we say, why is it that often there seems to be so much struggle for the Christian? And why does it seem like the godless just kind of go floating along and seem to get away with it? You hear people talk about that all the time. What Peter is saying is right now, God's attention is on his children. It's time for judgment. This word for judgment is not condemnation. It's more like discipline. It's a judgment of the good and the bad. But it's this purifying, refining process. We learned earlier that we are living stones. We're the house of God. We're the people of God. And right now, God's primary attention is not on the wicked. It's on his children. And he is purifying and growing and changing and strengthening his children as stewards of the gospel in order to accomplish this eternal mission. What Peter is saying, that's true right now. But if this is what God is willing to do for his own children, then imagine what he's going to do to those who have rejected the gospel. Hebrews 12 has really the same message, that God pays attention to his children. And he disciplines his children because he loves them and he wants to grow them and change them and prepare them and refine them for this epic battle and mission that will matter forever. When my girls were little, if we would go somewhere to the store or the mall or wherever, it was not my responsibility to discipline every child in the store. It was my responsibility to discipline 3 girls. Why? Because I'm their dad. They belong to me. And it was my responsibility to discipline them and grow them as their dad. Would it be true that the other children in the room got away with lots of things that my kids did not get away with? Absolutely true. Were there times when they thought that wasn't fair? Absolutely true. But at the end of the day, my responsibility was toward my children. That's exactly what Peter is saying. Right now, God's focus is on his children, growing them, refining them, training them, strengthening them, purifying them to be part of this epic battle for the eternal souls of the men and women around us. But then he turns his attention and says, but once Jesus returns and the children of God are safely in his presence, then he turns his attention to those who have rejected the gospel. The quote there is from the Proverbs. The idea of how difficult it was to save us is kind of this story of it cost God his own son. And it's been this continual discipline, refining, fiery process in order to prepare us for the return of Christ. So if that was what was necessary for his own children, what exactly lies ahead for those who have rejected the gospel? It's actually a very ominous couple of verses that what lies ahead is beyond the description of the text. One of the ways to think about it is for us as Christians, this world is as close to hell as we're ever going to get, destined for an eternity in the presence of God. But for those who reject the gospel, this world is as close to heaven as they're going to get, destined for an eternal destiny of torment, separated from the presence of God. So it all kind of begins to put things back into perspective. Verse 19, therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. So we've had this before in Peter. People often ask the question, what is God's will for me? Well, we had it earlier. It is God's will that I submit and do good in order to silence the critics. We had that in chapter 2. Now the text says, it may be God's will for me to suffer persecution for the name of Christ. He says, for those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls, that's a banking term, deposit their souls to a faithful Creator. Real unusual phrase, faithful Creator. This is the only place it occurs in the Bible. The unbelieving world would say, well, what right does God have to judge? The biblical answer would be because he is the Creator. And the Creator has every right to judge his creation. And so that's kind of why that language is used. In doing what is right. So basically the idea is, Peter is saying, if I have been found worthy to suffer persecution for the cause of Christ, that I will rejoice that God has found me worthy. I entrust my soul, I deposit it into the hands of God, and I respond by doing what is right for the sake of the gospel. It's a very sobering thing to realize that many of these first readers, soon after this, would suffer severe persecution. Many of them would be put to death. many of them burned at the stake, used as human torches in Nero's gardens. Peter himself, shortly after 1st and 2nd Peter, would himself be executed, crucified upside down for the cause of Christ. But what Peter was saying is to realize that this is a battle. And what is at stake are the eternal souls of men and women. This is not a cruise on the Love Boat. This is a trip on a battleship. What Peter is saying is that there is this epic battle where you're going to get bruised, you're going to get bloodied, you're going to get beat up, you're going to be exhausted, you're going to have to give all you have in order to ultimately share in the victory that will be ours when Jesus returns. If it becomes necessary that we suffer true persecution for the cause of Christ, if there's going to be this epic battle for the eternal souls of the men and women, boys and girls around us, if we're going to get bruised and bloodied and beat up and exhausted in order to share in the victory, if that's what's necessary, I say to you without hesitation, count me in. What about you? Our Father, we're just sobered by these words. It would be great to just cruise into the sunset on the Love Boat, but this isn't heaven. It's not supposed to be. And right now we are engaged in an epic battle for the eternal souls of the men and women, the boys and girls around us. Lord, there's those who are going to be spectators. There's those who are going to wear the uniform, but they'll stand on the sideline, content to hold a ticket to heaven. But Lord, there's many in this room that say, if that's the cost, put me in. God, give us the courage and the strength to take our stand, to not be ashamed of the gospel, to be faithful to our call. And if it is your will that we suffer for the sake of the mission, Lord, may we rejoice that we've been found worthy to be part of that which will last forever. It's in the name of Jesus we pray.
Now Bryan Clark joins us in the studio with author Kara Whitney and Back to the Bible CEO Arnie Cole.
Bryan, thanks for this message today. It's a very encouraging one. You know, if we didn't know better, we'd think that the godless were in charge these days. But tell us again that we are actually the victors.
Yeah, so it is really hard. But we were told by Jesus that it would be hard. And right now, Peter tells us God's focus is on his children. And it's just good to remember that. But Peter reminds us in the end, we win. The other part of that I love is it's on the basis of God's grace. So this isn't based on my performance, but on the basis of God's grace, we win, and that will be glorious.
So, Bryan, you've talked before about seeing previews of heaven in our lives, but I think we also get some previews of hell on earth as well. I remember as a non-believer, when we'd encounter Christians, we'd kind of joke, I don't want to go to heaven because none of my friends are going to be there. But really, hell's no laughing matter, is it? There's going to be nothing like it.
Yeah, I think that's true. We do talk about glimpses of heaven now, and I think you're right. There's glimpses of hell. For an unbeliever, this is as good as it gets. This is their heaven, and the future is not going to be funny, and it's not going to be glorious. You get glimpses of life without God, which is what it's going to be. But I think why that's such an important point is it should create in us compassion rather than anger. We shouldn't want that for anyone. So to respond to that with compassion helps motivate us with the gospel.
Considering then this message that we're actually on a rescue mission, we need to realize that we will suffer, and God sees that suffering. He's totally focused on us and what we're going through. So he's going to see us through this battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't ever forget that. Peter says we will obtain an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled and will never fade away. Our future is glorious. And that's part of what we have to understand to be hope-filled in a culture like this.
Yesterday, you asked us if we'd rather be a spectator, a bench sitter, or a player. But obviously, we need people to get into the game and fight the good fight. And that means not just pastors, right? I mean, that means people of all walks of life, just like Kara and I.
Absolutely. Every believer has a high and holy calling. There's no exception to that. As a matter of fact, one of the things I don't like is using the term volunteer in a church, because I don't really think it is voluntary. Every believer has a call in his or her life, and for God, it's a high and holy calling. Either you're obedient or you're disobedient. But there's no such thing as a believer that doesn't have a call. So it includes being called into the marketplace, called into construction, called into a neighborhood, called into every area of life. But you can't, on one hand, say it's a high and holy calling and turn right around and say, but it's optional. Those two don't go together. So I think it's critical. We all need to understand that. And in God's eyes, there's nobody more than, nobody less than. All he's asking is, I need you to be obedient to what I've called you to. And that's what he'll ultimately measure in our lives.
Okay, talk about being in the game then, which is where we're at. And I think all three of us, we'd rather be out uniformed up and on the field battling. But you need to be in God's word.
Yeah, so just one comment. If you use a football analogy, which that kind of uniform, bloodied, on the field analogy is, you can't just get out of the bleachers and walk into the field and be part of the team. You have to know the playbook, you have to know the play that's called, and you have to understand your role. So it's good to think about that's what the scriptures are, is it's our playbook if we're going to get on the field and make a difference. And Go Tandem is all about that.
It's really about a shining light, and being in the Word is the best way. Not only research shows that, but it's truly a light to guide us in a very dark world.
Yeah, gotandem.com if you guys want to check it out. Actually, I use it for evangelism. So if there's someone I'm speaking to about Jesus and I want them to stay engaged and I can kind of disciple them along the way, I use GoTandem. So gotandem.com.
You're listening to Back to the Bible. If you'd like to listen again, visit backtothebible.org.